What's the scariest thing you have ever seen? When I was really little, there was an intruder in my aunt's house and I came face to face with them. Saw my dad laying bloody-faced in grass in front of our apartments after hearing gunshots and went running outside to see what happened. Thought he got shot in the face and was dead. He had actually been pistol whipped and then his face stomped on. Still can't unsee it. What looked like the sun rising in the west. During the Cedar Fire, 2003, San Diego County. It was a mountain south of me on fire that was approaching the town I lived in. I was 13 and my dad had recently developed a really bad cough that just didn't stop. He coughed day and night for a couple weeks straight. One night as I was trying to sleep, I heard him from his room. It was kitty corner to mine and we both had the window open, crying from the throat pain and asking God to kill him, even if it was violent and bloody. He said he didn't want to live with this pain anymore and he wanted to die. He's a state employee and had insanely good health insurance, so I'd why he didn't go to the doctor. A week later he was driving me home and he said he had cancer. The rest of his battle with cancer was devastating and very painful for everyone. It started in his lungs and then eventually spread to his brain, which took about a year and some change. On his deathbed, everyone was there. My brothers and sisters had talked to him all before I arrived and they said, "Hey, Embershot89 is here. Say hi, Dad." Side note, my parents named me after a dog greater than I know. Anyway, so I show up and my dad starts bawling because he thinks he gets to see his dog and he looks at me and is like, "Who is this? Where's my dog? I want my dog." TLDR, I was the only person in the entire family, including the dog, that my father didn't remember as the brain cancer killed him. It was as if my entire history with him had been erased. My father died not remembering of my existence. Edit, my dad died less than a week later. Edit 2, I feel like I should mention I'm a man. Was driving home from a Halloween party one night when we saw something that looked like a large piece of plastic on the road. Saw it move and told my boyfriend to avoid it. It was a hit and run. Man lying unconscious, face down, across several lanes of the highway. His head lay just over the boundary of one lane and his body diagonally over the other. We pulled over to the side and had to redirect traffic around him since he was too hurt to try to move him. I visibly flinched several times as several cars came close to his head. The scariest part was when he regained consciousness. Luckily, a person with medical training had pulled over and helped us hold him still. His screams were terrifying and I'll never forget when he lifted his forearm. It looked like there was no bone at all. It just flopped. Not to hijack your story, but that's not terribly different from what it's like to work as a paramedic or EMT. Lots of motor vehicle accidents, especially when it rains. I believe you get used to seeing messed up stuff easier than one might when encountering such events in the wild because you're not alone. Probably firefighters or at least your partner are with you at the scene helping. And you can mentally fall back on your training so you don't freeze up. But yeah, it can still affect you. I don't work in the EMS industry anymore. 9 years was enough. But kudos to you for trying to pull him away from traffic despite the scary situation. In cases of severe physical trauma, if the person doesn't cardiac arrest within the first several minutes, then they actually have a good chance of making it. It's when someone cardiac arrests quickly after physical trauma that there's a very low chance of getting them back. No doubt the patient had a lot of internal bleeding, but if they were conscious when loaded into the ambulance, then they may very well have lived. And you very well may have kept another car from hitting them, saved their life. Just wanted to point out that although you may have messed with their neck a little, say they had a broken spine or neck, the fact that you pulled them away from traffic could have saved their life. Some people are afraid to get involved in emergencies because they don't want to be liable, don't want to catch something bloodborne, don't want to make things worse. But Good Samaritan laws exist for a reason. And it sounds like you did a great thing for the poor guy. Cheers. I was watching my grandparents' animals for a week. They live on a small farm, but all they have is chickens, ducks, turkeys, cats and dogs. My grandma would tell me stories about George the cowboy ghost that died on the land, and everyone but me had an experience with George. One night I was watching TV, the lamp turns off next to me on its own. I look at the lamp and think how weird, look back up and notice a figure in the kitchen. That slowly walks off out of view, and then I just hear something, a big pot, fall to the floor. I instantly jump up and investigate, and nobody is in the house but me. I locked all the doors prior to this experience. That week I kept all the doors locked, my bedroom door locked, and slept with my shotgun next to me. I love my grandparents' house, but I will never stay alone there. Frick that. Not really seen, but heard. My downstairs neighbor was fighting with her boyfriend. He was shouting and she was crying. I heard a slap and a baby start crying. The woman started scream crying and the boyfriend just shouted louder. They were fighting in the room right underneath mine. And at one point I felt the wall shake. My heart was in my throat. And I called the police. They arrested him. Something similar happened to me when I was 11. My bedroom shared a wall with our neighbor's master bedroom. And those walls were thin. I heard them arguing a lot, and it often woke me up. I was a pretty bold kid. So one night I banged on the wall and yelled "shut up," because it was about 3 a.m. on a school night. The husband cursed me out through the wall, but at least he shut up that night. Well, I don't think they realized how much I could hear. And the wife worked out it was all pretty audible. A few weeks later, I was woken to slamming doors and yelling again, and then footsteps hurried right up to the wall and I could hear the wife inches from my ear. She was crying and trying not to yell with panic, and told me to call the police. I was petrified. And then her husband caught up and I could hear him hitting her. Finally she yelled something like, "Oh my God, he's going to kill me. Please." And I was shaken out of it and ran to get my parents. Police were called, and word got around. She didn't take him back, and the one and only time the guy tried to come around to speak to her, my dad and the other neighbor stepped outside and just stood there, arms folded, glaring at him until he left. At the time I remember my mom being a little pissed that the wife involved me. Seems I was only 11, and I was a little disturbed by it. The older I got, the more I understood. And now I'm just glad she got out of that situation. She had a 1-year-old baby at the time. When I was in 6th grade, I was at a bus stop in the morning, and this one kid at our bus stop, he was in the 5th grade, was being called over by his dad. His dad kept yelling louder and louder for him to come because the bus was on its way. As soon as the kid ran across the street, the school bus turned the corner. It was a blind spot, and the bus driver slammed on her brakes as hard as she could. The kid jumped up and screamed, and the bus driver screamed as well, and she had this terrified look in her eyes. She didn't hit him, but she barely missed the kid. My mom was there, and she screamed too. I didn't scream, but I stared in shock. I thought I was about to see a kid get killed right in front of me. I was stage front of the Vegas mass shooting. I've had PTSD since then and lost my job because of it and never worked since. I have a hard time going anywhere. I'll spare the details. I hate trying to relive that night. Literally ruined my life. Last winter I rolled up to a car flipped upside down on the highway. I got out to see if he was okay and he was screaming for help, begging to get out. Other people came up to the car and we pulled him out and he was missing a leg. Turns out that was gone before the accident, but it made me nearly shit myself. My mom was dealing with kidney issues for a long time, and one random day I was at home watching TV and she yelled my name from upstairs. I was running upstairs and she said my name again, but softer this time, and that's the last thing I ever heard her say. When I got upstairs she was leaned back in the chair looking up into the air, completely unresponsive. She passed away a little over 5 years ago, and her blank stare and the way she yelled my name has haunted me since then. A couple got ran over by a truck. I didn't see the accident, but I saw the blood and organs of the dead couple, and I still can't get rid of that memory. When we were younger we had horses. My sister decided one day to tie the lead rein of our crazy horse around her waist while taking him out to the field. I warned her if he got spooked, she'd break her back. Not 30 seconds later, he bolted. He ran circles round the paddock as her body flopped lifeless under all 4 of his hooves like a rag doll. Horrific. He then went to jump the barbed wire fence with her still attached, but thankfully the rope snapped. It's been 23 years, and when I think about it I can still see it all frame by frame. Edit: I'm so sorry I posted this just before bed, and have just woken up for a pee and seen all the responses. No, she was knocked out, but very much alive. Amazingly, no major injuries, just battered and bruised, with a lovely array of horseshoe and rope marks all over her head and body. The doctors actually made us all leave the room while they asked her what had really happened, because it seemed too unlikely that someone would tie themselves to a horse. Anyway, sorry to worry you all. Got in a bad car accident, and when I got out from the flipped car my friend was covered in blood and lifeless. He was the one driving, and the passenger behind him had misfired a gun. Turned out that he was shot in the head, and that is what caused the accident. By some miracle he is still alive, and yes, the guy behind him is in prison. When I was a service manager for a John Deere implement dealer, a guy had gotten himself caught in a hay baler. It pulled him in and it killed him. Unfortunately said hay baler came into the shop, and we had to deal with it. There were definitely some leftover remnants. I'll leave it at that. My neighbor had a farming accident. The 5-year-old was riding in the jump seat and fell off and was killed by the machine behind. By the time he noticed it was way too late. I played baseball with the kid's mom. She is so fucked up to this day. She blames herself because she decided to take one of the twins into town with her and leave the other one with his dad that day. It been rough on the other twin too. Everything in his life is overshadowed by his mom's constant reminders about what happened. I never thought about this guys that would have had to clean up after that until now. My 5-year-old son almost get run over by a driver looking at her phone. Blew through a pedestrian crosswalk, and if I hadn't pulled him back by his hood, he'd be dead. Girl had no idea. Finding my coworker on the floor lifeless from a heart attack. My wife's first cousin was building a derby car to run in the demolition derby one year. He lived behind us, basically right behind our garage, with only a small alley between us. I was working on our car one fall evening when he walked over and asked if I could help him put the engine in time. We walked back over and I got in and started the car several times while he was turning the distributor. After 4 or 5 goes at it, the engine finally takes off running, but I hear a clanking sound like you might hear if someone dropped a tool into the fan. I hear him say okay, shut it off, and I get out. He's just standing there looking at the engine for a few moments, then steps back. That's when I see blood all over the fan and radiator, and he's holding one hand in the other and asks how bad is it. He moves his hand and I was in total shock. He had put his hand on the moving metal fan blades that were belt driven and he hadn't installed the fan shroud. It had cut off his thumb and first 3 fingers on his left hand. I ran and got a towel and called 911 of course, but what freaked me out more than anything was as I was sitting there with him waiting on the squad, the only thing he complained about was his eye burning. I say to him, "Okay Sherman, let me look at your eye." He raises his head and looks at me and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The force of the spinning fan had sent a very large piece of his thumb bone straight through his eyeball. I almost fainted. I was so scared for him sitting there for what felt like an hour, but they were there within 10 minutes. I was in a car accident that involved a motorbike. Me, my mother and my sister went out at about 10 p.m. to get some fast food. As we pulled into the apartment gate, a bike going what the cops said had to be at least 120 miles per hour slammed into my mom's car, shearing the entire engine bay off. The bike's rear wheel almost killed my mom but missed her by centimeters. With all electronics off, the car spinned around 4 times. When it stopped, the only light was from the headlights of the car behind us. My door was jammed and the car was on fire from the severed fuel lines. When we got out, the people who stopped couldn't find the biker, so I started looking for him. Then I found him. My God, it was horrible. His face was unrecognizable and many body parts were mangled and broken. I stood there frozen until someone saw I found him. They must have seen my face. The guy said, "Oh Lord have mercy. Sorry you saw this, son." I will never forget that sight. I've had a few unplanned run-ins with dead bodies unfortunately, but one stands out more than the others. I'd snuck out of the house very late one night as a young teenager for a short walk through some nearby trees by a lake. I was in poor health as a kid and was under constant supervision in the daytime even after my health improved. I really needed the alone time for my mental well-being. I smelled something odd, not nice but almost sweet, and walked towards it. Up against the edge of the water and only revealed by the moonlight hitting the lake at just the right angle was a person laying face down. I immediately stopped thinking about the smell and 100% of my focus was now on this. I ran over to see if it really was a person or if my mind was playing tricks on me, and I didn't need to get too close to realize that it was. I approached cautiously and tried shaking them to see if they were okay. I didn't get any kind of response from them. I screamed for help and for someone to call an ambulance and could see the lights in the nearby houses turning on. I tried to roll them over so they weren't face down in the mud. It was extremely difficult and I kept slipping because everything was so wet. My hands, the mud. I remember vividly that I noticed that they were cold and that something just didn't feel right. Honestly, it hadn't even crossed my mind that they might be dead until I touched them, and suddenly I was somehow certain that they were. I thought I'd attempt CPR. I was not in any way trained. I just didn't know what else to do with a dead body as a scared kid in the dark. I put my hands on their chest and with just the slightest pressure my hand slid under their skin as it came away from their body. The smell was awful. This body was not fresh. It was probably only 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. I was just sitting there, my hands inside another human being's skin, processing what was going on. Next thing I know, I'm lifting away from the body. I had no idea what was going on. I remember thinking I was dying for some reason. Lol. I was being picked up from behind, under the armpits like you might a toddler. I didn't realize until then a small crowd had gathered with lights and stuff in response to my shouting earlier. Thinking back, the person picking me up was probably only in his early 20s and was very freaked out too, but trying to keep it together for me, bless him. So many truly terrible things here. Mine are watching my son have seizures, he's fine now, and watching 9/11 live on TV. My grandfather dying a slow and torturous death from ALS. The worst part was when he finally decided to give up and asked to be taken off the life support. Watching him literally die in front of my eyes changed me. I miss him every day, and when I got married, his wedding ring became mine. Damn, I miss him. I worked as a mental health professional years ago. One of my patients was a 6 feet 7 inches, 200 pounds man. He had severe paranoid schizophrenia and believed demons lived in his stomach and would randomly believe other people were demons trying to attack him. I was downstairs by the cafeteria when I heard screaming. Here comes my patient running at full speed, screaming about demons coming to get him and throwing punches at everyone near him. Luckily, I had a male coworker with me because my 5 feet 2 inches self was not going to do shit to stop him. Eventually, we had to get all the male workers in the building to hold him down while we gave him an injection of his emergency med. His screams of terror were haunting. He was so scared. He left our facility soon after for punching a nurse in the face. I'm sorry you had to experience that. Schizophrenia is one of the scariest things I've ever had to deal with. My little brother was diagnosed around 18. He's 34 now, and some of his delusions and outbursts have been really unnerving. I have small children now, and unfortunately I've had to cut him out of my life. I feel horrible about it, but he's just way too much. Wasn't me but my sister. She was walking home from my grandparents' house, saw 2 men hop a fence holding guns. She then freezes as they stare at her. They run off into the woods behind our house. She then proceeds to run like hell home and has a mental breakdown. A large brown bear on the bank of a river as I was kayaking past. Fortunately, it just watched me. Was checking a trail cam I have out for deer one year, and I'm standing in this clearing with that tall broom sagegrass in it. I see something in the corner of my eye towards the wood line, and at first I thought it was a deer. When I got a glimpse of it, I realized it was a huge fucking wolf. I'd never seen a wolf in my area before, and I've spent a lot of time in the woods around here. I've seen plenty of coyotes, but they are relatively small, like a dog. This was the largest canine I've ever seen in my life. It was the size I imagined tigers and lions to be. I didn't know they got that big. To be honest, maybe he was just abnormal. I don't know. Anyway, when I noticed what it was, my adrenaline skyrocketed, and I ducked down into the grass. I immediately started looking around me for a stick or rock or anything in case I had to defend myself. I didn't see anything nearby, and I sat there squatted down as the wolf just passed through the other side of the clearing and went back into the woods. I don't think it noticed me. I stand up after a few minutes and start backing away real slowly toward the ATV. I drove up there, but it was a good 60 yards away or so. I kept my eyes glued on the wood line the whole way. When I got to the ATV, I hopped on and got the fuck out of there. I don't wander into the woods anymore unarmed. That shit was scary. My mother swallowing a bottle of pills and downing it with vodka. It was my 21st birthday, and she did it in the middle of the living room with the words, "I hope I haunt you." My dad refused to do anything, so I called the emergency services. I don't know what was more terrifying, my mother trying to kill herself in front of me, or my father's complete indifference. I don't much like birthdays or family gatherings anymore. It would have to be my mom having a severe seizure and having to pin her down so my dad could give her a suppository medicine to stop the seizure. It went on for some time, the hour or so before it happened, when it happened, and the drive to the hospital are very clear in my mind. In the hour or so before it happened, we knew something was wrong. On one hand, you hope nothing happens, but then you're also constantly prepared, asking questions, observing responses, rub her back to see if she acknowledges your presence, change the channel on the TV to see if she notices, etc. As the hour progressed, we could tell she was becoming less responsive, and her answers to questions were slower and making less sense. This would happen before a seizure. When you know a seizure is coming, it's a stressful waiting game. Then it hits, and you're just holding on like hell and hoping the person doesn't severely hurt themselves or die. Wait for the meds to kick in, then drive to the hospital. Hope like hell you get there fast enough. It was awful. The first time was the worst because you're never prepared as a kid to have to take care of your parent like that. Apart from the experience being awful, whatever was left of your parent being a superhero is gone. My mom had lost most of that already, but that day was the last little fiber of it. We had reversed roles, and now I was the caretaker. Unfortunately, that role didn't last long. I'm grateful I got to take care of her, though. Had a friend get his cheek slashed by a beer bottle that was smashed through the passenger window of another friend's Explorer. It sounds pretty tame, but you could see the flesh folding, and the face has a lot of capillaries, so it also bleeds profusely. I got a little lightheaded at one point. He ended up getting 60+ stitches in his face. A beautiful view of a valley on an autumn day, from a cliff on the side of a mountain, while careening out of control on the wet road. You do not want to see a view like that out of your windshield. I survived out of sheer fucking luck. I was at the store and got stuck in an aisle behind a young couple with a very young baby, maybe only a few weeks old. The man had the baby wrapped in a blanket and resting on his shoulder while the woman pushed their cart. At one point, she asked him to pick up something somewhat heavy from a low shelf. He bent down, picked up the object and put it in the cart, then kind of hopped the baby up against his shoulder again. Only the baby went up a little too high, slipped out of the blanket, went over his shoulder and hit the ground. Dad screamed even before he turned around. Mom grabbed the baby and they both ran out of the store. I just stood there, stunned, looking at the floor where the baby hit. There was a little spot of blood. The baby never made a sound. I don't know what happened to it. I have a similar story. I was stopped at an intersection, and a lady was walking across the crosswalk with her little baby that was in an umbrella stroller. Suddenly the baby's hat flew off. Mom stopped hard to grab the hat. The motion of the stroller jerking to a sudden stop caused the little baby to just flop forward and land straight on the top of his head on the pavement. He wasn't buckled in, as she probably thought he'd never get out as he wasn't even old enough to crawl. I will never forget the look on that mom's face as she scooped her baby up and ran across the street. Many people stopped to help, and someone drove her to the hospital, which fortunately was about 2 blocks away.